Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show, Plant-Centered listener. My name is Ashley, and I'm so excited you are here today. I want to give a special shout out if you're listening from Fresno, California, or Raleigh, North Carolina, which is basically my backyard, Jacksonville, Florida, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Chandler, Arizona. Thank you so much for being here today. We have a very special guest for you. If you're familiar with the PlantPure Nation documentary, we have Nelson Campbell on the show today, which I'm so thrilled for you to listen to our interview. He's just such a wealth of knowledge and so kind and generous with everything. He is the son of T. Colin Campbell, who actually coined the term plant-based. How wild is that? He was looking for a way to describe what he was researching and this diet that he was studying, and he termed the coin plant-based, which I think is so, so cool. He also wrote the China study and all those great things. So we have his son, Nelson, on the show today, and I'm so thrilled for you to listen. Before we get into that, I just want to thank you again for your transparency in the scholarships that we are offering with the course, which is still available. We will announce the winner of that scholarship on our July 3rd podcast, so a week from when this airs in June. Thank you again for your submissions. You have a few days left if you want to submit your chance to enter to win a free course, which is plant-based in 30 days. So it's a guide in helping you go plant-based. And so we would just love to hear your story. Katie and I still are like, how are we going to pick one person? Oh my goodness. It's just been, y'all stories are incredible. So we appreciate you. We appreciate this community. If you're looking to work together, if you're looking to grab the course, which is plant-based in 30 days, we have those resources always in the show notes. So if you're curious to learn more about what that looks like, go ahead and explore those. I hope you're having a great summer. I think I've talked about berry picking on here before, but if you haven't gone berry picking yet this summer, blueberries are now starting to become in season, depending on where you're at in the US specifically. So I would highly recommend it. It's just such a fun activity to do, to kind of get outside and forage your own fruit. I've done it a couple times this summer, and I would love to go back and get some more blueberries because they are so good and just so different than what you buy in the grocery store. So if you're looking for something fun to do, highly recommend it. But I definitely want to get to Nelson's interview because it was just really phenomenal. He, again, talks about PlantPure Nation documentary, the communities. We talk a lot about the importance of community, and then he talks about some new stuff that he's working on and some stuff that's recently been launched this year, which Katie and I had the privilege of going and screening his latest documentary, which is also in our backyard in the Hillsborough, North Carolina area. So Katie and I live in the Durham area. Katie lives in the Raleigh-Cary area. And we got to go to a farm where the Campbells hosted a screening to watch their latest documentary, which we talk about in this interview. So it was such a special event, and it was so cool to meet them and talk with them and learn more about all the wonderful things they are doing to promote plant-based eating. And this latest documentary was, oh my goodness, it was incredible. I don't even have words to describe it. It was phenomenal. So highly recommend that. Again, we talk about it in the interview. So let me stop talking. Let me introduce Nelson, and we'll just jump right into the show. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Well, welcome to the show, Nelson. I am so grateful that you've taken time out of your day to come on the show and just share your experience with PlantPure and everything that's going on in your life right now. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk with you today, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you've shared your story before, but for listeners who aren't quite familiar with your story or your family, I'm curious just if you could explain how PlantPure kind of came about. It's always when we look at people who are in the plant-based space, especially, it's hard not to compare maybe our beginning when we're first starting to go plant-based to someone else who has been in it for a little while now. So I'm curious if you could just kind of explain how this all came about for you and how you got started.
Okay, well, it's a pretty long history, so I'll just hit a few of the high points. But I didn't grow up plant-based. I grew up on the kind of diet that most other people grow up on. But I was close to my father and watched him as he was going through his research career. And we had a pretty big family. We'd always sit around a big table for dinner every night and have interesting discussions. But a lot of times he'd talk about his work. And so I really did have a front row seat to all of that. And he started to make a lot of his key discoveries when I was a teenager. So in my late teens, we started moving toward a plant-based diet as a family. And then in my early to mid 20s, I became fully plant-based. So I've been plant-based for quite a while. I won't tell you how old I am. and I'm just a big fan, and I also watched over those years. I watched the resistance that my father faced over his career, which was a lot more severe than what I think the public tends to understand. He went through a lot of grief within his profession, within academia. People in government industry kind of going after him, and so I just saw the battles that he had to fight, and was inspired by that, of course. And my background is as a sort of socially conscious entrepreneur. I refer to myself, and I was doing kind of entrepreneurial things for a good part of my life. And in the early to mid 2000s, I decided, I really would like to help get this health message more into the mainstream. Kind of just from the what at that time was considered more of a fringe idea, into the mainstream. And so I started thinking about a grassroots strategy that we could pursue to do that, and that involved food and grassroots organization and media and different things to help get this message out to more people. So I started working on that in the late 2000s. And actually, the first thing that we did was we developed some food products and recipes that we could use to support an immersion program. And at that point, this was a new idea. People weren't really doing this. And so we started testing this concept out in our local community. And since you live here locally, where I'm talking about.
Yep.
We did a program in Wake Forest, and we did a program in Mebane, and kind of perfected it. And I remember the first time we did that program, we got the biometrics before and after, and we couldn't believe the results that we had. And I shared them with my father, and he was amazed as well, because again, this was the first time that anyone had really done something. I mean, maybe they had done this someplace else in some other clinic or something, but I hadn't heard of it, and certainly
Yeah.
didn't have those results. And so it was pretty amazing to see, cholesterol falling by, 20 to 25%, in 10 days, and all these health conditions reversing.
Yeah. In 10
And
days.
so,
10
yeah,
days too, which is pretty
mhm,
phenomenal.
yeah. And so we were doing that, and then the opportunity came along to make a film. And we tell the story of how that opportunity came to be in our film PlantPure Nation. So, I won't go into a lot of detail about that. We'll just encourage people they can watch that movie, which is on Amazon Prime. And at that point, I didn't know how to make a film, but I wanted to make a film because I thought it would create a platform that we could stand on to better execute the strategy, the grassroots approach that we were envisioning. And so there was a storyline that developed in Kentucky, and I kind of envisioned how I could extend that in a way that could create an interesting film. And then I reached out to some people who know how to make films, and they joined me and taught me and basically sent me to film school for 2 years. I learned how to write and direct and different things. So came out with the film PlantPure Nation, and that then became a basis for helping us launch what we've done since then.
Yeah. And that came out in 2015, right? PlantPure
That's
Nation?
right.
Okay.
Yeah, it came out in theaters in 2015.
Okay.
We did something kind of crazy with that film. We produced the rough cut, and normally you're really embarrassed about a rough cut
Yep.
because there's a lot that you still haven't figured out yet. So, but we took the rough cut on tour, and we went up and down the East Coast and the West Coast. I took it on a cruise boat and showed it. And everywhere I went, I said, please let me know your criticisms after the film. We always did a Q&A. So I always had a long line of people. And and then they were gave their impressions, and we got in the car to drive to the next place, and we literally were editing it as we went.
Wow.
So that was kind of fun.
I mean, that's pretty cool though to take feedback from people who are actually invested in the film, who have taken time to come
Mhm.
and watch it, and for you to be able to take feedback and maybe make some adaptations or adaptations to your film after that. That's pretty unique, I would say, for you and the viewer.
Yeah, and it's fun, to get feedback like that. A lot of times, and we all do it. I mean, it's part of being a human being, I think, is we have this ego inside of us, and but if we can just let it go a bit
Yeah.
and make ourselves vulnerable and open up to other people and to their ideas and feedback, we can do so much more.
Yeah.
And I really that was confirmed for me in this process of making this movie, because we got a lot of great feedback and made a lot of improvements.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what was it like coming from more, because I know that you were involved in like more government economic side of things, then you merge that with, going to film school and doing all that. Or was it actual film school? Or
No,
was it
it
so
was
okay, that's
so yeah. So what happened? The details around that is a key player in all of that is someone who's now become actually one of my closest friends is John Corey. John Corey produced Forks Over Knives, and he produced other films as well. And so he's a master at producing documentaries, but he did something that also was very humble of him. When he came to our project, we were in a little disarray because we didn't really know what we were doing. And there were other issues going on too. But he came in, and at that point, he could have just sort of taken over and, written the film and done everything. But he didn't do that. He said, "You've got a story to tell. You need to tell it. I'm going to teach. I'm going to work with you and support you and kind of teach you how to do this."
wow.
And that's what he did. He was very empowering. So he, instead of taking over the process, he explained, here's how you write, and here's how you do this and you do that. And so I
Wow.
was able to take that instruction to do what I did with the film. And it was a team effort. It wasn't just me. We had two great cinematographers, and we had a fantastic editor, and of course John is the producer. So it was a real team effort. But it was a lot of fun. I love film. It's probably if I look back on my career, it's the thing I like most of all, because I've always loved to write. So at one time when I was younger, I studied philosophy and government, and I thought I
Wow.
might be a writer. And if you told me that someday you're going to do business or you're going to be an entrepreneur, I would have said you were crazy. And so, but what I learned in film is that it's a process at its core. It's a process of writing.
Yeah.
You tell a story. And normally when you sit down to write something, at least when I was young, you had a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. We
Yep.
didn't have computers yet. So uh, now, of course, we use computers. But when you write a film, you're not using your words. You're using the words of the people in the story that you have filmed. And typically, you have hours and hours and hours of this stuff. So you have a lot of content to work with, but the currency are the words that are spoken on that film. And
Yeah.
so, but the writing process is the same. You have a story to tell, and every piece has to flow from the piece that came before and flow into the piece that follows. And in filmmaking, it's really important that there's a flow. because if you digress in a way that creates an eddy in the storyline, that's when people are going to get up and go to the refrigerator,
Yep.
turn off the TV or something.
Which is definitely not the case for PlantPure Nation, because if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend going and checking it out, because there are moments in time where you're on the edge of your seat watching and going, what is going to happen? Because the story is incredibly captivating. So I think you just did such a remarkable job, you and your team, with that.
Yeah, the hard part of that film was actually driving that storyline. And the work that we did in Kentucky, I was living in a hotel, maybe cheap motel, and I would go to sleep at night wondering if someone was going to blow our cover, in which case it would have
Oh,
all been over.
oh, wow. I
But
didn't even think
because
about that.
yeah, so there was a lot more that went into that than we could show in the film.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well, you mentioned your dad getting a lot of pushback, which I think a lot of us cannot even relate to the level of just criticism he received. When you were doing your immersions early on, were there people questioning, like, no, you fudged the numbers, or there's no way that can happen in such a short period of time? Because now I know you're doing them more often, and that's a big part of what From Food to Freedom is about. But initially, was there pushback or skepticism with what you were doing?
sure, there are a lot of people who would hear the story and kind of look in and say, "Yeah, how were you really able to do that? Is that real?" And so one of the things that we did is we took a bunch of that data from those early immersions, and we gave it to some researchers at the University of Cincinnati, and they actually had to get IRB, Institutional Review Board, approval to do the study. So this was an IRB approved study, but they went in and analyzed the data, and then they produced a report. So we do have that to give it some additional credibility. But of course, since then we've done this over and over and over again, and anyone can do this.
Yeah.
You guess you could do it, see for yourself. It's pretty easy to get these results.
Yep, absolutely. Yes.
Mhm,
So Plant Pure Nation came out in 2015, and then From Food to Freedom came out this year. And
mhm,
I feel very honored that I got to watch it when you all filmed it just locally here at a farm,
mhm.
which was a really wonderful experience. What kind of improvements or changes, or maybe how is From Food to Freedom a little bit different than Plant Pure Nation? And for people who have not seen From Food to Freedom
Mhm.
yet, we definitely want to talk about where they can watch that. But what are some differences between the two films?
Yeah, well, one thing I would share is that after we did that screening that you went to, we made some further edits based on
Oh,
feedback that we got and from other people after that.
okay,
So the
nice.
final version turned out to be a little different. I think
Oh,
a little improved, but it is in final form now. So in the first film, as you know, there's a political drama that we helped to create, um, and the purpose of that film was really to show to people, kind of up close and personal, how has this health message been suppressed for so many years. I mean, this is really the greatest health discovery ever made. I mean, there's
yeah,
nothing when you think about it that compares to this, and yet the data on this started to come out in the 70s. And there, of course, there were even studies many years prior, as my dad has pointed out in some of his writings. But the kind of the hardcore science that he performed, he was doing back in the 70s and into the 80s. He went to Washington and lobbied and tried to get this information out, but he couldn't. So, when you tell people this information, that's one of the questions they have is, okay, if this is true, then I would have heard this by now, right?
right.
So the purpose of that film was to show how powerful economic forces can suppress this message. Um, the second film is a little bit different. The storyline doesn't, it's not extended kind of in a dramatic fashion as we saw in the first film. Pretty much most of the story takes place in a house in Greensboro, North Carolina. We convened a group of people who had type 2, and had as a key word, type 2 diabetes, who were all taking insulin. And two of them brought their spouses. So there were 8 people there, but 6 participants. And we demonstrated how in 10 days, and I don't want to totally spoil the movie, but how that disease can be completely resolved, which is remarkable. It's astonishing. And
Yes.
the power of this diet is so tremendous that when you work with people like that, you actually have to have medical supervision, because what happens is their bodies start producing insulin so quickly that if they keep taking the same dose of insulin, they can go into hypoglycemic shock. And so they have to be monitored, and they were here, and there was a physician so that she could reduce their dosages down. But we show the healing effects of the diet in a very dramatic way, in a situation where everything was controlled.
Yeah.
There was 100% compliance. People had to eat the food that we were cooking. And we wanted to do that to show the maximum impact, because we also wanted to make a larger argument relating back to this issue again about the suppression of this message, and that within the context of the pandemic that we just all went through.
Yeah.
And of course, when we talk about the pandemic, we made a conscious decision. We didn't want to touch any of those topics that just get people so angry, whether it's masking or vaccinations or any of that stuff. And it's a nonpartisan film, but we wanted to make what I consider to be even a bigger point about the connection of food to disease and immunity, and our failure to share this information during the pandemic. And so it's a different film that way. We were trying to show the maximum healing effect of the diet, and then relate it back to the pandemic, and touching again on this issue of how this information's been suppressed.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much, even if you go to different websites, I know you talk about this in the film as well. Maybe it was even in the discussion after the film when we were talking, but there isn't a whole lot of information on diet and diet's connection to disease and illnesses and things like that. There's this big missing piece that just
Mhm.
isn't being addressed. And it's frustrating.
It is very frustrating. I'll just share a little story that we were involved in during the pandemic. So we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we put together a petition? Because we have a lot of grassroots followers, and we thought maybe we could pull this off, is to put it together a petition calling on our leaders, and they were named in the petition to share this vital information with the public. This was in the midst of the pandemic. And so we put the petition together. We actually reached out because we had some connections to Bill Maher. So we reached out to his staff and his team, and they agreed to promote it as well. But I remember the day we released it on Facebook, and I could see the views. It was actually like starting to go like a hockey stick,
Ah, yes.
like this. And then all of a sudden, Ashley, it just flatlined.
Huh.
Right? Because and we did some research into this later, and if you dig into the information that Facebook had out there, they said that, hey, if you're going to post anything about the pandemic, and you're touching on anything basically controversial, we're going to suppress it.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. So that was really aggravating.
Oh, of
That
course.
they would have done that. But then, of course, at the level of the government, and there were, we know some of the people in media and in the government who are fully aware of the connection of food to immunity, who made conscious decisions not to talk about this during the pandemic.
Mm, wow. That's so tough. I mean, I feel like it's kind of similar to what's going on with the dairy industry right now, trying to silence the plant milk industry and, all these things that are
Hmm.
going on. And I feel like so many times you have to follow the money and see, yeah, just what's going on. But I'm sure we could talk about that for a long time because
Hmm.
it's a very frustrating thing that's going on, kind of above us. So,
Yeah, I think the part of it that I've never understood, though, Ashley, is how anyone. I know we all have to make a living to support ourselves and support. So I
yeah,
have some empathy around that. I don't want to sound too harsh when I'm saying I do understand that. But if you are a really influential person, and you could easily find work elsewhere,
Yeah.
and perhaps you've already made a lot of money. I just don't understand how people can consciously do wrong, that they
Mm,
know will harm so many people.
yeah.
You know, a lot of times we talk about the system, the pharma industry, the government, the whatever. It's always this big kind of alien entity, impersonal entity, but it's really people.
Yeah.
It's people who make decisions to live this way. And that's the part I don't understand. How
Yeah.
can we live for how can we live that way, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. There's actually a quote on your website, and I wrote it down because I thought it was really remarkable and I wanted to touch on it at the close. And I feel like it's related to
Mhm.
what we're talking about here. And it says, if you don't mind me reading it, it says, there are two impulses present in many of us. One is the impulse to be right and to judge others who are wrong. The other is the humble, non judgmental impulse to love. And I know you all relate very heavily to the second part, but I was curious, what makes you favor the humble, non-judgmental love aspect of things? Because that's truly what you're doing, especially when you're hosting these immersions and with the films that you're creating and these pods that you're creating, which I do want to touch on. But what makes you lean more heavily into that versus maybe more like judgment or being harsh or critical of people?
This goes to a very deep level, I think, Ashley. It goes back to this issue of ego again, and wanting to be right. And people will say things, and they'll represent themselves in a certain way, and then feel the impulse to defend that.
Mm,
They define themselves maybe by what they say, and sometimes by their reputations, and sometimes by their money and their things, but that's not who we really are. um we are not those things, but we have all these attachments around us, and so we're always driven to want to preserve and defend those things. But if we can, and many Eastern philosophers talk about this, but also it's in the Bible. This was the core of the message of Jesus, and so this is a very spiritual concept, that if we can live without those attachments, and we can make ourselves vulnerable and open to other people, what that really means is that, first of all, it allows us to open our eyes to see bigger truths. Because today, I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on, there's splinters of truth everywhere.
mm,
That no one side has the truth. There are splinters of truth. And if we can open our eyes, we can see those truths and weave together something bigger, so we can see more deeply, and we can understand, and we can see the bigger connections and come together to make change. Um, and when we open our eyes that way and we see those truths, we also can learn then to open our hearts, and we can expand our compassion. People have always loved their neighbors. Even just to take the extreme example, even during the Holocaust, the people working at those, I can't even imagine, those gas chambers, would
yeah.
go home to their communities, and they loved their families, and they loved the neighbors, in the house next door. But that was a very limited, kind of almost perverse type of love, when it's very tribal.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of our spiritual leaders have tried to get us to do is to open our eyes so we can see these bigger connections and make our love more expansive.
Mm,
And here's the key. At the end of the day, if we do that, we feel greater freedom and satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives. When we live that way, it's actually better for us.
oh,
And
yeah.
that's this for each of us individually. And that's the secret that most people don't understand. When they hang on to those attachments, that dogma, those superficial ways they define themselves, they limit their lives, they limit themselves, and they don't get as much out of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Was this part of the driving factor for starting the pods in a way where people can actually come together, even if it's just like a tiny bit of a driving factor, where people are coming together, not just online, but actually together face to face in a community that they can be vulnerable and share and connect with people on a deeper level.
Exactly, Ashley, because when we are living in community, we do tend to become more vulnerable and open to one another.
Yeah.
That's the power of connection. And that's a travesty of our modern world is technology is raced way ahead of our humanity.
Yes.
And so we become captive to that. Of course, this AI thing is a whole nother that's a whole nother kind of scary step in that direction. But we've got to figure out strategies, um, and there are many that could be developed, but we have to commit ourselves to figuring out how to rebuild local communities, how
Mhm.
to enable communities to come together and people to connect. When we do that, all of these isms that plague us, they tend to go away
Yeah.
because when we're living in connection, we all experience each other as the same. We're, at our core, we all have, the same inner core, and we discover that through our connection to one another. The problem we have in our country, though, is when we pay, over 90% of every tax dollar that we pay, it goes someplace else other than where we live. It goes to this monstrous federal bureaucracy that subsidizes the meat industry and the pharma industry. It goes to fight wars overseas. It goes to all these other places. And so local communities don't have the resources that they need. There are so many social entrepreneurs and visionaries and leaders, even in the most under-resourced communities.
Yeah.
But they don't have the tools that they need, which are it's not just financial, but it's also informational. We need to figure out how to reroute resources into our communities and provide information on best practices and things that can be replicated.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of like when you plant a garden. You don't go grab a plant and turn it upside down and jam it into the soil. You put a seed in the soil and you let it root and grow. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah. I know, I couldn't agree more. And would you actually mind explaining for someone who might not be familiar with the plant pure pods what they are, especially if someone's listening and they're looking for that connection? They're looking to be connected with like-minded people who maybe are centered around a plant-based diet.
Mhm. So these are just groups of people, and we have a directory in our on our website at plantpurecommunities.org. So there may be one near you. If not, it's easy to set one up. All you need is one or two other people. It'll very quickly grow. But typically, these are groups of people who meet monthly around a potluck. And like as in our local pod, a lot of people do the same. They'll come in and they'll post their recipes on the wall. So it's an opportunity to taste and learn new recipes. But more than that, to connect and commune with people who are living this way. And that's it's very fulfilling. It's a lot of fun. Our local pod has always been something that Kim and I have enjoyed going to. And then some pods also do things in their communities. They're undertaking strategies to help share the message within their communities, and that's kind of the next phase that we want to encourage, is for local pods to become more active in helping to spread the message within their communities. So we're looking at a few different ideas around that. Right now, though, Ashley, our biggest struggle is actually funding. It's been extremely difficult to raise the money to support our organization, and we obviously can rely on volunteer help, but if we don't preserve the kind of the core of the whole thing, which is a core group of people who wake up every day and it's part of their job thinking about how do we support and grow this, the whole thing will fall apart. So
Yeah.
that's what my focus is now, is trying to raise some money. And actually toward that end, if people want to help, they can hopefully consider being a monthly supporter, and go to plantpurecommunities.org to do that.
Perfect. And that link is just below. So if you want to do that, you can easily just
Hmm.
click below and go to that link
Hmm.
and donate if you're able. Yeah, absolutely. So the plant pure pods are something that people can get involved in, or they can create their own if there's not one in their community,
Hmm.
which is
Yep.
really exciting. Okay.
Very
And
easy to do, and they tend to grow on. You'd be surprised if you just had two or three other people to start eating with and having a potluck, how quickly it'll grow.
yep, yep, absolutely. And it's amazing. Some of the people I met at your local pod, people were
Hmm.
just starting to join and they were just really almost like plant curious. Some were
Hmm.
vegetarian, some weren't maybe fully plant-based yet at all, but they were just so inspired. And I mean, then they're tasting all the food and they're like, okay, I could get used to this, because everything is so
Hmm.
delicious, but it is such a fun way to be together with people who share a similar view when it comes to how we eat, but then also inspire maybe
Hmm.
other people to do the same, which is always so exciting.
Yes, and that's a very important function of pods, is giving people who are curious about this a place to come to learn about it, to talk to others who have been doing it. So.
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, Nelson, I'm curious what is coming up for, first of all, I guess this is airing in June. Where is maybe the best place for people to access From Food to Freedom if they really want to watch it, which I highly recommend you should, because it's a really great
Yeah.
documentary.
So we're looking at two different pathways for a public release of that. Ashley, we did a limited release with Food Revolution Network, more of a private kind of online release to their community. But now we're considering two different pathways for the public release of this. One pathway is placement on Amazon or Netflix, and that's typically not so easy to do. There's a lot of competition for that. But our first film is on Amazon, and it was on Netflix prior to that. And this film has won a lot of awards at film festivals, so I think we have a very good opportunity to get it placed on one of those platforms. But we're also considering the possibility of just releasing it on YouTube, but having, putting a viewer on our website that everyone can access freely, and doing that in a way where people kind of funnel into it and learn about the nonprofit and are encouraged as well to provide some financial support. So if we do the Netflix Amazon approach, that's going to take longer. It could take several months just because you have to go through a process that doesn't happen overnight. If we do the YouTube approach, it'll be up there a lot sooner, potentially even in the next few weeks. So what I would recommend that people do, if it's not up by the time this airs, is go to plantpurecommunities.org and subscribe,
Mhm.
because if you're on our email list, you'll be the first to know.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great. Are there any, I mean, do you have any other plans for any future documentaries or anything like that kind of coming up this year or maybe the next couple
Well,
years?
well, I've had an idea for a documentary that it's been bubbling on my head for a long time now, and I think this one would be more, at least to me, even more exciting. I'm just, really motivated to do this. It would be a documentary that would be focused on making these larger connections. So, Plant Pure Nation and From Food to Freedom really focused on the food and health benefits. But there are so many other aspects to this idea, and especially important are the environmental connections,
Mm,
which you can go online, you can research that, you see a lot, but there's actually some really critical information that's not known by the public as to actually how quickly the planet would heal if the world went plant-based. The magnitude of change is far greater than is understood, and we, through our nonprofit, we actually supported a well-known climate researcher to do a study beginning to look at this question. And I've spent a lot of time talking to him, and there are some pieces of the puzzle that have been left out of prior research on this topic. So there's a very powerful connection. It's not just the climate, but also the biodiversity and all aspects of our environment. There are also kind of ethical and even spiritual uh, arguments around this idea. And so I kind of have a concept of how we could do a film that would tell this story and tie it all together. But again, it comes down to money. I wish I was a multi-gazillionaire and I could do
Right.
whatever I wanted, but right now we don't have the money to do that. I'm just trying to raise enough money to keep our organizations afloat. Um, but maybe someday
Yeah.
uh, I'll get a chance to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like a topic that needs to be shared with the world. So I will be
Hmm.
anxiously awaiting that because I'm sure it's going to happen eventually.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wonderful.
hopefully.
Yeah. Yep.
One thing I'll say, Ashley, is we have two organizations. We've talked about the nonprofit and the pods. We also have a PlantPure Foods business that we started in part to create food products that could be used to support immersions. Um, to generate some revenues, we created these frozen products that are now in some supermarkets. But we just created a new line of meal starter products. We've been working on this concept for a long time. In the past, we were limited by not having a co-packer who could do what we wanted them to do. But then we found this incredible co-packer, actually headed by a guy that took my dad's Cornell course and is a plant-based and a big
Wow.
advocate. So,
Yeah.
anyways, we have a line of these meal starter products that we just launched. Each one is like a meal base, can be used to produce multiple recipes. So
Okay.
there's about 50 recipes, which we're continuing to add to. So if you buy these 8 products, it's really all you need in your pantry, to live plant-based. So I'd encourage people to check that out at plantpurenation.com. And there's a connection of that as well back to the nonprofit, because as we get our feet under us and we're able to do this, we want to undertake strategies through the nonprofit, outreach strategies in under-resourced communities where chronic disease rates are highest and where oftentimes healthy, affordable foods are most lacking. And so we want to support those efforts with these meal starters, and PlantPure will waive 100% of its profit margin when it
Wow.
does that. So the food just gets passed through from the factory, right to those folks who are being served. That's a dream I've had for a long time. I tell this in PlantPure Nation. I told the story of my grandmother who really died a pretty terrible death, and it was related to the food that she ate and her poverty.
Yeah.
This is a very important issue that as a country we need to think about. So, anyways, go to plantpurenation.com and you can support that organization by trying its meal starter products.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that because that's, I know, definitely a really neat thing that y'all are also doing as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll include all those links below in the show notes so that you can easily connect with Nelson and everything he's doing with Plant Pure, along with the things that Kim's doing as well, because we had her on the podcast a couple months ago. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, that's the last thing I would like to end with is my wife Kim, who is a nationally regarded cookbook author and just released a new book, Plant Pure Comfort. So yeah, you had her on your show, and she's the one who connected me
Yep.
to you. But she's been a key part of everything that we've done. Her background is as an educator, but she's also been. She actually wanted to go to culinary school out of high school, but her dad discouraged her.
Mm,
But she has really honed that craft over 30 uh, 30 plus years. And so I would encourage folks you can just go to Amazon and Google her, search her, and you'll find her 3 cookbooks. But to check that out.
yeah. The most recent one, the comfort food
Mhm.
one, is spectacular. It is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these meal starter products, the recipes there are many of them are based on her recipes that she has in those cookbooks. So,
Okay. Okay. Wonderful.
mhm.
Is she going to be doing some cooking online potentially in the future?
Yes, we're going to be relaunching. She had a cooking show before, kind of a cook along, but now it's just going to be pretty kind of a standard cooking show. But we've already filmed two or three segments
Oh,
of that, so we'll
nice.
be releasing that soon.
Okay, wonderful. Oh, we'll look out for that then too. Okay, so lots of
Hmm.
great things coming
Yep.
up. And for you listening, like I said, I cannot recommend PlantPure Nation and From Food to Freedom, both of those documentaries enough. From Food to Freedom, especially just because it is so new and I watched it a couple months ago. I mean, I cried, I laughed, like there were just such a mix of emotions with it. It was such a captivating story and documentary. So highly recommend checking both of those out. And then everything else below in the show notes we've provided some links that you can check out as well to connect with PlantPure. So Nelson, thank you so much for everything that you're doing and for coming on and just sharing all the work that you're doing. We just really appreciate you and your family.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and I appreciate what you're doing as well to help, spread the word in this podcast. It's going to take thousands, millions of us doing these sorts of things to build a plant-based world. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely happy to do it. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
All right, thanks, Ashley.
Until next time, keep thriving.